Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are listening or watching this. Welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa Kinski. I'm your producer and co-host, and joined as always by Francois and So how you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Good. Your background is different.
Background's different. We got a new office. If anyone hasn't seen it on the LinkedIn yet, but yeah.
Very
How are
excited.
you liking the new office?
I will like it so much better when I actually get to record in there.
Yes. Good point.
Next week, whole new layout. But everybody, if you're not watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, you should check us out. We have changed the background of our pod. We're going to have new thumbnails soon too. We're just doing a whole revamp, new office, new podcast, new everything. And today we have a new friend joining us all the way from Scotland. We have Ben Leonard. Ben, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm really good. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And you know what? I just totally forgot. We don't have anybody's names on the screen. You guys, it's a ragtag day today. This is just how we're running things this afternoon. But it's evening for you, Ben. It's 8 p.m.
It is 8 p.m. over here in sunny Scotland.
Is Scotland as beautiful as all the pictures make it out to be?
Well, they're selective photographs. No, it is a lovely country. It is a lovely country. I'm a bit of an ecological and environmental nerd, and large parts of the country used to be beautiful, pristine Caledonian pine forest, and they cut a whole lot of it down. So all those beautiful purple heather-covered mountains that you see are basically a barren wasteland of nothingness.
Oh no!
But efforts are being made to replant the Caledonian pine forest, so there's good stuff happening.
Okay, good. So long as they're going to fix it.
Yeah, we're catching up on all of it, hopefully soon. Globally, looks like a lot of people are trying to make an effort.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Well, Ben, for those that don't know, excuse me while I settle my dog. For those that don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? And I would love to go all the way back because I think I listened to your interview with is either Norm or Ryan. I can't remember. You used to study like dolphins and stuff. So let's get the whole background.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I'm Ben. I'm from Scotland. I'm from a town in northeast Scotland called Aberdeen, and it's affectionately known among locals as the oil capital of Europe. It's an oil and gas town. And my parents moved there from England, much like everyone else here, for oil. And being in Scotland, where we have a large amount of countryside, wonderful coastline, lots of nature, albeit some of the forest has been chopped down, as I mentioned, I got into wildlife and nature, and I ended up studying zoology and then ecology. And like everyone else from this area, I still ended up working back in oil. My job was an environmental advisor. So I helped oil companies not break the environmental regulations. And I helped the environmental regulator make the regulations. So I kind of had my thumbs in two pies. And I liked that job. So the dolphin thing, Lisa, was I studied dolphins and whales when I was studying. And I kind of specialized in those in my final year. So I was a fully qualified professional whale and dolphin nerd. And then I ended up in e-commerce after I had a health scare, which caused me to have to take a break from all my fitness hobbies. I still do now. I'm better now, but I had a heart condition, and for about 9 months, I had to take a cocktail of drugs and stop all the boxing, the CrossFit, the lifting heavy weights, the running around like a maniac.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed something to do to keep me in touch with those hobbies. And I started a brand of fitness equipment. And that's how I first stumbled into e-commerce.
So before we dive into, go ahead.
When was the fitness brand established?
Yeah, early 2016. So it was late 2015, early 2016. I got the heart thing for the heart condition for the third time, and usually it's you get it once, maybe twice, and it's acute. It's not chronic. You take some anti-inflammatories. It's sorted out. But if it keeps coming back, it can become chronic and life-altering. So I was basically told, look, take all these drugs and do nothing for 9 months.
Oh, geez.
And yeah, I was sadly tidying out my gym gear that I wasn't using, and I looked at my kit and I thought, well, I could do a better job of that. So I did, and so began the process of learning about how to build a brand and bring it to market and get it in front of customers and sell it to them.
Wow. Very cool. Well, before we dive into that, I do have to ask, what is like a fun fact that a lot of people don't know about either dolphins or whales that will like blow our minds?
Fun fact. Here's a quick. So the other day, a pod of orcas swam past my town, which is not a particularly frequent occurrence. But orcas are not whales. Everyone calls them killer whales. They're not whales. They are actually one of the largest dolphin species in the world. So killer whales are dolphins.
I did not know that.
There you go.
I was lied to my entire life.
My friend says killer whales. They know killer dolphins.
I'm gonna make sure I correct them. And so I guess I know you mentioned that you had everything sitting around. How did you start to learn about e-commerce back in? I'm guessing it was you didn't just pick up and try to find a supplier and immediately list it. There had to be some background to it.
Yeah. So I used to incorrectly say, I started the process of learning by doing. And to some extent, that's true. But also, I had an unfair advantage because I come from a scientific background. I applied that to the methodology. So it was try something, analyze it, see what happens, look at those results and think about what those results mean, change something, so change your hypothesis, and go again. And I applied that through everything from developing products to marketing products to the brand. Pretty much everything was that, ask a question, see what happens, tweak, go again, rinse and repeat. And over time, I, became good at e-commerce and more confident and able to, not have quite so much guesswork and get things right first time rather than the second or the third time. And over time, I became more competent. And that's how I got going with it.
And when you say like fitness gear, I assumed you meant like leggings and t-shirts and stuff like that. But you're actually doing like lift wraps and things like that.
Yeah, so I'm allowed to talk about the brand. So I've now sold that brand, but the buyer talks openly about me. They use me in their PR all the time, actually. So the brand was called Beast Gear, still is called Beast Gear, and we sold to fans of strength training, so powerlifting, Olympic lifting. Then there was the combat side, so boxing and MMA. And then there was the conditioning side, which was, fans of CrossFit or generally just going to the gym and keeping fit. So there were 3 kind of sub-fitness niches within that. And that was all because I enjoyed those things.
That's awesome. And that's generally like, I think we talked to Carlos about this. That's usually like a faux pas of don't pick a product just because you're passionate about it. But it seems like you had enough of a competitive market over there. So did you just sell within the UK or were you selling to the US as well?
I started in the UK because, remember I had no background in business and I just felt comfortable starting here. It just made sense to me. I'm in the UK. I will sell in the UK. That's, to my non-business mind at that point in time, it made sense. I pretty quickly expanded it right across Europe. So France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland, Czech Republic, and now Amazon is in Sweden, the Netherlands. And then not long before I sold, I got into Australia and then the Middle East, so United Arab Emirates. I was just about to go to the US and possibly China too when I sold, but that was good that I didn't because it meant that I was leaving some meat on the bone for the buyer.
That's definitely a smart move.
How did that transition go from the UK to the rest of the EU in regards to supply chain?
Yeah, so obviously now we've got Brexit, right? So we're not in the EU anymore, but this didn't affect me back then. It was pretty straightforward. So to begin with, I was selling on Amazon and on my own website, Beast Gear's own website, to customers in the UK. But customers across Europe could still buy my products. So somebody in Germany could buy my products on, say, amazon.de, but it wouldn't have the Prime badge. And it would take a couple of days to get there. It would be fulfilled to them from a fulfillment center in the UK, but they'd be buying it on the German platform, looking at a German listing. I had to register for something called Pan EU, and it was 2017 when I did this, and it was not as easy as it is now. Registering for VAT in France, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, Poland, Czech Republic was pretty painful. It was not as straightforward as it is now. Millions of forms to fill in, not in English, for Spain, I even had to have something notarized by something called a registered notary, who had to literally stamp a document with a wax seal, like you would imagine, a letter 200 years ago. So it was a very painful process to go through, which was fantastic because nobody else wanted to do it. So after I'd done it and jumped through that hoop, or overcome that obstacle, I was like looking around this landscape with no competitors. They didn't want to do it. I did it. I practically doubled my sales overnight just by doing that. Suddenly,
Wow.
Mario in Milan could get my product the next day. So rather than having to wait 2 or 3 days for it to get shipped from the UK, because I now had Prime all over Europe, and I would put my stock into a fulfillment center in the UK, and for free, Amazon would distribute my products across their fulfillment centers right across Europe, according to demand, according to their algorithm.
Yeah, because there are two options, right? There's Pan EU. It's slipping my mind what the other one's called, but there's
EFN,
another
European
one.
Fulfillment Network.
That's what it is, and that's where they have one central fulfillment center, and they ship it from there. Let's say it's in the UK, or not anymore, but
Yes.
let's say 2017. If it was in the UK, then it would ship directly to the customers. How was it dealing with VAT for all of that? Because that's a tricky, it's a very complex subject. It's something we're going to talk about later too.
Yeah, so my UK VAT continued to be dealt with by my fantastic accountant, who's now my business partner in the brokerage. And my European VAT was dealt with. So at the time that I registered for Pan EU, Amazon dangled a carrot on a stick in front of me, which was, we will get you in with our VAT partner, who will deal with all your VAT right across Europe. And I'm not going to name them because they were absolutely abysmal. I ended up getting that service for free, but really I wish they'd been paying me, because the headaches that caused was pretty terrible, to the point that the VAT authority in Germany, Poland, Italy, and Spain were all sending me very threatening letters about my tax returns being incorrect. So, eventually everything got ironed out. But the reason was they just couldn't deal with the sheer volume of tax returns they had to do, because they weren't, when they signed this deal with Amazon, they did not expect the volume, the number of accounts to then have to be dealing with. But
And
yeah, you had to file your VAT returns with all of those countries.
for listeners who don't know, what is a VAT or VAT?
Value added tax. So it's pretty much equivalent to sales tax. So in the UK, for instance, it's 20%. So it's 20% tax that when you sell your product to the consumer technically is paying it. As the seller, we're collecting the tax on behalf of the tax authority. In the UK, that's HMRC, which stands for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, because it doesn't go to the Queen, but we still call it that. And we pass it on to HMRC.
Gotcha.
And do you mind saying where the products were from? Were they from Asia?
Yeah, no problem at all. I was sourcing products in the Far East Asia, so in China, and in the Middle East.
Okay. And so how was that process from China through the UK through the rest of the countries? Did you have to pay import duties every time that it crossed into new countries as well?
No. So because the UK was part of the EU at that time, I would import so for instance, let's take a shipment from China, for example. It comes on the ship, lands in Southampton in south of England. I would pay the import duty and the import VAT, which I could claim back because I was VAT registered. And from there, because we were part of the EU, Amazon's then moving it around all the fulfillment centers right across Europe. That's it. No more, nothing else to pay. Now for sellers, and I'm still a seller, I'm building new brands, it's a little bit different. So if I want to use Pan EU, I need to put stock into an EU country, which the UK is not anymore. So for example, I might want to land my stock in Germany or the Netherlands. And from there, I would pay the import duty and VAT there on that shipment. And then I would have another shipment coming in for the UK, on which I would pay separate duty and VAT to the UK tax authority.
And the UK is still sort of getting its shit together when it comes to importing and the clearance, right?
Yeah,
It's something
yeah,
where no one really knows what's going on.
it's a mess. I mean, I don't mind upsetting a few people listening to this who fall into the Brexiteer camp, but Brexit is the biggest own goal in UK history, in my opinion. It was turkeys voting for Christmas. It was just complete. We have a phrase. We I don't know if you guys have this word over there, but we would. It was bollocks. It was
Mm.
just yeah. I wish it never happened, but it did.
Yeah, and not to get political, but it screws up the supply chain when something that it has been talked about for years, and for years everyone has said, well, we'll figure it out when it comes, and well, now that what's the saying, that the chickens have come to roost? Is that the saying, Lisa?
Yeah,
Maybe.
Something along those lines.
they've come home to roost.
Yeah, and so right now. Well, is the UK facing, I know the EU is, but is the UK facing even more challenges with things like the Suez Canal blockage?
Well, no doubt when the Suez Canal blockage occurred, and we're still probably feeling repercussions from it
Mhm.
now, importers here were hurt, as they were anywhere who had any country where you were the country of destination and you had a ship coming through the Suez Canal. Whether we are feeling it more or less than the EU, possibly more, because one thing, okay, yes, we've got airports, they've got airports, but you know what they can do? They can bring goods in by train.
Mm.
You're seeing more and more people now bringing goods by train from China to Germany.
And how's that looking for
Yeah,
the UK? Because when the UK was part of the EU, you could have trains go from China
to
to the
Germany,
UK, to Germany, and then be distributed to the UK.
to the
Is that
UK
right?
across the English Channel, yes,
Mhm.
or float across. I mean, you could still do that now, but now it's getting way more complicated because you're going from China to the EU to the UK. So if you want to cut out the confusion of going China, EU, UK, you just go China, UK on a boat. Well, that's great, but then you have a blockage in the Suez Canal, and let's just hope that the Egyptian authorities are able to make sure that doesn't happen again. And I'm sure they'll be doing their best,
Yeah.
because it sure as hell was a big headache for them.
Yeah. Well, and they're suing the Ever Given for what I tell you, Francois, like
I don't know,
$19 million or something
no,
crazy.
that's too low. I think
Was
it's
it?
more than that.
Like,
Yes, I can imagine it'd be more than that. Possibly
Yeah,
a
it's.
billion.
maybe.
How are you managing this craze and logistics, aside from the Ever Given, which you guys are feeling it in the UK, and the EU is definitely feeling it. North Africa is feeling it. We're feeling it here in the US, and we're feeling it tremendously, mostly because of the global container shortage, but also shipping carriers they're also, just like I said earlier, they're trying to get their shit together too. And so they're charging an arm and a leg, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
But what other logistical challenges are you facing with your brand, not just being in the UK, but also in the EU?
So, for instance, less to do with the EU, to be honest. But I mean, I love sourcing products from China, right? China's great, and I will continue to source products from there in the future. But I'm building a new brand now where I have deliberately sourced products from Vietnam because, and I've slightly diverged away from your question there, Francois, but because it's
No,
not
please.
necessarily the EU, but it just came to mind because of the uncertainty there has been around China and the US, China and the West in general, all sorts of topics, not just human rights and what's going on in the west of China, but things like there's been some disagreements with the UK government and China over their involvement in the development of our 5G network. Things like that. Just all these different topics make the relationship between China and the West a little more uncertain. And I'm sure big grand scheme of things, I think everything will come out of the wash and be fine. But there's nothing wrong with making your moat that little bit wider by, I'm not saying stop sourcing China, but have more baskets for your eggs. So in the case of this new brand I'm developing, I have a Vietnam basket now with some eggs in it. Does that make sense? And partly it's because I've got an amazing manufacturer there, but partly it's for these other reasons involving China.
So the China plus one, and you've chosen Vietnam.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah, and ideally China plus a few.
Yeah.
And it's important. But we were speaking to Meg Labardwaj a while back, and we were talking about that China plus one concept. And she's very adamant about sourcing in India, for example. And they have tremendous manufacturing capabilities in India. And I believe the UK and India have fairly strong relations. And I think they're continuing to grow those relations now. Particularly, in the midst of the UK-China relationships just kind of suffering. But how did that transition look when you moved over to India? How did that process look? Is there like just an Alibaba for Vietnam? I said India, I think. I meant in Vietnam. How did you start to find suppliers there?
Well, I'll just straight up give away this secret. I found this supplier by... I snooped on a competitor and looked at their import records into the US and found their supplier in Vietnam and went straight to them. Mic drop. That was it. I wanted that supplier, and then I ended up working with, on this particular product, I'm working with a world-renowned product developer for this industry, and they have a close relationship with that supplier. But I am.
They already had an established
very close to India. I'm sourcing from Pakistan. So for the first brand, I source products from Pakistan, with which the UK also has close relationships. Just historically, probably tighter relationships with India, but nonetheless.
So do you keep up with any of these sort of geopolitics to make sure that your supply chain stays stable, or is there anything that any place that you kind of keep eyeballs on to make sure that you're sitting in a comfortable spot?
Yes and no. I mean, big picture, I've had it in the back of my mind that China plus one or China plus several, right? But I try, in terms of getting quite specific, no, because there's only... I'm just some guy, right? And I can't affect, particularly in any way, what happens between nations, right? And what's going on in a political sense. So, whilst it's important not to bury your head in the sand, it's also important not to get so caught up in this stuff that you just freeze and don't do anything. I might get hit by a bus tomorrow. Can't live my life not going outside in case I get hit by a bus. So I'm not gonna, on balance of probabilities, everything will be all right. I'm gonna get my stock out of Pakistan. I'm gonna get my stuff out of China. I'm gonna get my stuff out of Vietnam or wherever I'm producing. But having diversity of manufacturers within each country, and then diversity of countries, and bigger picture, diversity of income streams, and yada yada yada, all these things. For every topic, every aspect of your business, I think you should have several baskets. But getting too hung up on each basket is only going to stop you from making progress. You're going to get pulled in so many directions. You're going to get pulled 1 inch in a million directions instead of moving forward.
So, and how does that diversification help a seller when they're making an exit? So you've made a successful exit for one brand, and now you're doing Ecom Brokers and, helping folks sell their businesses. How does that diversification help them?
Sure. Yeah. So the more diversified you have different aspects of your business, the wider the moat around your business. And what I mean by that is the better protected your business is, if you like. I use this analogy of a moat, right? So your business is the castle. The moat is protecting you from attackers. The wider the moat, the safer your castle, the safer your business. So when you diversify different aspects of your business, you're better protected and therefore a more valuable proposition for someone to buy, less risk for a potential buyer when they want to take on your business or buy your brand from you. Having said that, this whole diversifying concept doesn't want to apply to what you're selling. You need to be building a brand which serves a particular group of people. You can't just sell a whole variety of diverse stuff, right? You want to have diversity in the systems and processes which protect your business, such as supply chain, but you don't want to have too much diversity such that you then just have a mishmash of random products. You need to be building a suite of products which solve related problems for a particular group of people. Could be people who like knitting, could be people who like motorcycles, could be people who like triathlon, whatever it is. The way to go is to build a brand.
And then how do you manage an effective supply chain around that brand? Because when I speak to a lot of sellers, particularly newer sellers, but even those that have been fairly successful and they've been doing business in a very traditional way, almost some might call it more of a cookie cutter method, where they try to apply the same principles to everything that that they're doing in their supply chain. How does one start to establish this solid supply chain from the beginning? Because obviously someone that just wants to start out on Amazon, just like you did, they have something in mind, they go out, they try it out. It can either be a huge success if they put their mind to it and diversify to other countries, for example, or it could be a dud because they don't know about PPC, or they didn't build the right relationships, or they don't understand logistics or tariffs or duties. So I guess a better way to phrase that question is, how did you start to effectively manage your supply chain with your first brand?
Well, there's a lot of different aspects to that, but you mentioned one which would be good to shine a light on, which is relationships. So straight off the bat, what's the first cog in that supply chain? Well, it's the manufacturer of the product in the first place. You got to build a relationship with your suppliers. They're not just some person. It's not just some random Alibaba account. These are real people, and you need to build a relationship with them. So if you can have video calls with them, if you can meet them in person, either by going to China or wherever you're manufacturing, or meet them halfway at a trade show. And by the way, if you're looking for suppliers on Alibaba or wherever it is, and you can see that these suppliers have traveled halfway across the world to come to a trade show in the US or Europe, you can be pretty sure that these guys are legit. The scammers don't come halfway across the world to a trade show. Only the legit suppliers do. So it's all about building relationship. Show interest in these human beings that you're communicating with. Learn about their family. Ask them how many kids they have. Ask them about what they're into. You know what I used to do? I used to add, I still do, all the Chinese and Pakistani national holidays to my Google Calendar. And then my suppliers would be blown away when I would mention some obscure Chinese festival that it was next week. They're like, how do you know that? Like, oh, I just take an interest in Chinese culture. And, they are blown away. And that type of thing, and many other things like it, go to building a relationship to the point that you are swapping photos of your kids on WeChat with these guys. Get WeChat. So that's the first step of relationships. And that's not just your supplier, but your freight forwarder too. Get a relationship with your freight forwarder. When my first daughter was born, we came home from the hospital to the biggest bouquet of flowers you've ever seen and the biggest bottle of champagne you've ever seen from my freight forwarder.
Aww.
Who was, great guy, and I'll be using him again in the future, with new brands. Same goes for 3PLs. Are you using a 3PL in your destination country? Build a relationship with them. So relationships, I think, are the foundation of most things in business, but supply chain for sure, because what if something goes wrong and you suddenly need to get something fixed? If you haven't got a relationship with somebody, well, then why are they going to bother to help you?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember we had this huge storm come hit the UK a couple of years ago. If anyone is listening or watching this from the UK, you'll remember the beast from the east. It was this massive storm that brought crazy cold weather from Siberia, from the east. across to the UK. And it screwed everything up with shipping. So I had a bunch of stock on a ship, which was supposed to come into Southampton. Then it got sent away to Poland. Then it came back again. And I needed to get my stuff off the ship and into Amazon fast. Because I had a great relationship with my freight forwarder, he was able to help me quickly. And because I had a great relationship with my supplier in China, we were able to fast track an order to the top of the queue, get it on a plane, and flown over quickly so I didn't go out of stock. None of that would have been possible without good relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can't preach that enough. Like Francois has been singing the relationship song for so long, and
I have. I mean, since you came, I think we've always been talking about relationships. I love to hear it, first of all, from those that are successful and those that are not successful that realize that relationship is the key part. But it has very much moved to this very transactional relationship sometimes. And even, it's ridiculous. I find it extremely ridiculous. I'm usually the first one to call BS on someone that wants to jump ship for their supplier just because of one small issue. And I know I've done it a few times in some of the Facebook groups, and I'm sure some of people hate what I'm saying. And I've had people that have argued with me about it, which is perfectly fine. But there's some instances where as soon as one little hiccup goes wrong, and this is, someone actually that had a relationship with their supplier for, they said, I think it was 2 years. And that there was, this one issue. And when asking them, there's like, well, I just think it's time to diversify. Well, you could diversify without cutting off your relationship of 2 years. 2 years is a long time. I know a lot of people that get married in less than 2 years of being together. I guess aside from like calendars, holidays and things like that, right now, it's not like we can just pick up and go, visit someone in China. How are you managing some of these relationships with your suppliers?
I'm regularly chatting with them. And I know that might sound to some people quite like, there'll be people listening saying, having friendly conversations with your suppliers is not gonna change anything. Well, but it is, because they're human beings and you're a human being. And through all this crazy COVID stuff where we can't connect with people properly, it's when you make the effort to connect with people, it goes a long way and it sticks in somebody's mind. So it's chatting on WeChat. It's asking how they're doing. It's sharing a photo of the trip, the hike you did the other day, whatever it might be. That's one thing. And then it's just keeping them up to date with your plans, because suppliers rely on knowing what you want to do. So I speak to people sometimes and they're like frustrated, or they get annoyed when their suppliers, like they think their suppliers pestering them because they're asking for what's your plan? What's your plan for the next quarter with these products? Hey Ben, when are you going to be launching XYZ product? Keep your suppliers up to date so that they know you're still there, you haven't forgotten about them. They understand what your plans are so that they can help you plan for what you want to do. And that will make your life a hell of a lot easier when the time comes.
And you exited Beast Gear relatively recently, right? When did you sell that brand?
It was actually late 2019.
Late 2019.
But
okay.
I'm still developing products for the new owner. So when I sold, I created a consulting agreement where I continue to develop products for the owner, which is great. I have my cake and eat it. I love developing products for that brand. So that's something I help people do with Ecom Brokers now. So yeah, it was late 2019. It was actually, I can talk about this. They use me in the PR all the time. I sold to Thrasio, and I was their second European acquisition. So the way this landscape has changed since then is just crazy. I think they made me their offer in September 2019, which is exactly a year after they formed. But even then, no one had heard of them. This all blew up in 2020, this whole buying and selling of e-commerce businesses.
And so so you continued to work with, I'm assuming, your existing suppliers then with your kind of consultant agreement with Beast Gear. But I'm sure you let your supplier know that, like, it was changing hands and things like that. And
I mean, I have virtually nothing to do with the supply chain now. That's all handled by the new owner. But I continue to maintain a relationship with those suppliers, partly because I'm developing products through them, and partly because I like them, and I have I may need to work with them in the future. Whether that's directly developing products if I choose to with different brands, or whether that's, hey, I have a relationship with somebody in China and I need some help in China with something, right across China or Pakistan as well. So it's this phrase has been used so much it's almost become a cliche, but your network is your net worth. And so just because at some point in your life somebody, I could quite cynically say, oh well, this supplier over here is no longer useful to me, therefore I'm not going to bother. Well, first of all, that's just not very nice. They're a nice person. I like them. They looked after me when I went to China. And second of all, I never know when I'm going to need them again. And it's just not good enough to then just reach out in 3 years' time and say, hey, I need your help. You need to maintain a relationship.
There's an element of niceness, right? I think this is also a topic that's never talked about enough. Just being kind can go a long way, whether it comes to freight or manufacturing or whatever the case may be, or just holding the door open for someone, for God's sake. It's not hard. But when you say developing products with your supplier, how does that interaction sort of go? Because sometimes when we start working with new sellers, and they will listen to podcasts and they hear this phrase, developing with their suppliers, what they imagine is, I have a concept and I want to make this microphone, and I just know that I want it to look square. And so they'll approach suppliers with that. And so they say, oh, I just want to develop this product with you. But how does that process go with you?
Well, it depends. So if I'm developing a product which I have designed, so I've developed products in the past where I've had a concept for a product, and then I've worked with a professional designer to design the product, then have a registered design done for it, which in the US is basically a patent. Get all the 3D drawings done. Then it's a process of talk with my supplier, find out if they have the capability to make it. Possibly we're going to need to get a mold made, which the contract states that I own, and the mold has got my brand name embedded in it, so nobody can rip it off. And then they are producing my product. That's one thing. The other might be, so I'm never a fan of just taking a product straight off the shelf and slapping a label on it. You always have to do something to hopefully make it better, but in any case, make it distinctly yours and your brand's. So what I tend to do is have conversations with my supplier, preferably on video if possible. In person is even better if it's doable, not during COVID times, obviously, where we'll talk about, well, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what already exists. What do you already do in this space? And they'll say, well, this is what we do. We do this, 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 and this. Great. Can we take this bit and that bit and that bit and that bit? Don't like that too much. What if we did this? Look what this supplier is doing, look what this brand is doing. Sometimes I'll even buy a competitor product, ship it to my supplier. And I won't say, hey, rip that off, but I'll say, that little bit there, can you take that and apply it to what we're already doing? And they say, yes, this is China. We can do anything. And, away you go. There's not an SOP for this. There's a lot of gut feeling, human conversation, collaboration, taking their ideas and saying, well, we can't quite do that because our machine, you see, the machine does it like this, but if we were to do it this way, would that work? That's how these things go. There's not a white paper on this. I don't think.
And I don't think so either. It very much is fluid. But I also don't want anyone to hear this and think that they can approach any supplier.
Oh, no.
So
no.
I do want to dig a little bit deeper into that. What do you mean when you say supplier? Is it a new supplier, an established relationship? Do you talk about financials at all?
Do we talk about what, sorry?
Financials, maybe
Yeah,
budget,
okay.
or
So, yeah, got it. So somebody's new, right? So you're probably looking at Alibaba, which is a perfectly fine place to start. On Alibaba, and forgive me, listeners, if you know all this and I'm preaching to the converted. So, Francois, Lisa, stop me if I'm preaching
go
to the
right into
converted
it.
here.
We're never going to stop you.
So you're searching on Alibaba. You're going to have the option down the left-hand side to filter. And these filters are very important. So immediately you want to be filtering on things like quality standards. So ISO 14,000, ISO 9001 for quality, ISO 14,001 for environmental standards. You're going to have BSCI. You're going to have, which is related to social aspects. You're going to potentially have other standards on there in relation to things like child labor, etc. You want to filter down on all those. You want to make sure that you're finding the best suppliers. You're also going to have the option to filter on whether somebody is verified on Alibaba, whether somebody has got the gold standard in Alibaba. This basically means that they have taken the effort to have their account audited by Alibaba, and they've also paid for a premium subscription. So already we're getting rid of the scammers and the tire kickers and the middlemen. Then you're going to want to look at, well, how long have they had an Alibaba account? Now, there's some suppliers that won't have been on there long for perfectly legitimate reasons, like A, they're new, or B, they just kind of haven't been on there. But really, Alibaba's been around for quite a while now. So decent suppliers should have been on there for at least several years. The next thing is, if you're searching for a particular type of product, you'll find that, and I'm assuming we're talking about China here for the sake of this conversation, most, and this is a global thing, but most regions of China specialize in particular things. So if you're searching for, I don't know, dog collars, whatever, you're going to find that the Chinese factories have the name of the city usually as the first word in their name. And so suppose the region of China or the city in China that does the best dog collars is, Shanghai. Most of your factories are going to say Shanghai, blah, 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 Shanghai, blah, 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 Shanghai, blah, blah, blah. If you see one that says Dongguan, probably not going to be as good, because they might well be a middleman actually just purchasing all the dog collars from Shanghai. You're going to want to then click into the suppliers and have a look at the products that they do. And if they're doing like a mishmash of random things, or if they're doing a whole bunch of completely different stuff, they're doing furniture and then randomly dog collars isn't there, they don't specialize in dog collars. It's a bit like what we were talking about before when I said you need to build a brand and not just a mishmash of random stuff, right? You need to specialize. So then look for the supplier that specializes in the type of stuff you're looking for. That was a very, very brief overview. There's a super smart dude who is also from Scotland, actually, called Kian Golzari, who has a YouTube channel. Never met the guy. Really like his work. Kian, if you're listening, we should get a beer. Kian Golzari, he has a YouTube channel. Search him. Really smart guy, talks a lot about sourcing.
I think his channel is even called Sourcing with Keon, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
But just to cycle back a little bit, when it comes to approaching those suppliers itself,
Yep.
When you're talking to your established suppliers, that conversation is going to be different, right?
Yeah, very different.
I mean, you know who they are, they know who you are, they know that you're good for whatever you're bringing up to them. You're not just blowing smoke. I think a lot of times buyers, or in this case Amazon sellers, will think that their message holds more weight than it actually does with factories and sellers. And we need to remember that these are factories on, let's say, an open marketplace like Alibaba, and they're getting dozens of requests likely per day, and likely by very similar sellers, because they saw that they were selling, let's say, dog collars, just like your example. Mm-hmm. So everyone wants to make these customizations to dog collars. But when you're approaching them, and this is whether you're new or established, do you talk to them at all about financials and budget and a little bit more about your project as a whole, or any plans that you have?
Yes. And the reason for that is I want them to know that I want to build a long-term relationship with the supplier that I'm going to choose. Mm-hmm. The way I position this to the potential suppliers is I let them know, look, we're looking at 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, different suppliers. We're getting samples from all of them. I tell them what we're trying to achieve. We're going to place a small order to test the market. We're going to ramp it up. These are our forecast sales. This is the price we're aiming to hit. This is our plan to expand across, these marketplaces, whatever. This is what we're going to do with the product. These are the similar products that you also stock that we would also launch if this is a success. We want to build a relationship with you, which is mutually beneficial over time. If you can help us out now on keeping the quality high, but with a decent price and a decent MOQ, then we can explode this together. That's how I present it to them.
It's interesting that you use the word decent because a lot of times, and we were just talking to Carlos Alvarez about this too, MOQ is something that, it's important to note, but it's not something where if their MOQ is 500, you should be shooting for 100, particularly if you're doing customizations.
Yeah.
It's funny that even you scoff at that because that's the reality. But there is some level of misinterpretation. I don't know where exactly it's coming from. But it's that any factory, and it tracks back to what you said earlier, that it's China. Anything's possible, right? But everything's possible with enough money. Everything's possible with enough of an MOQ, with enough of a budget. And it's a, there's enough meat in the sandwich for everyone if you do have the funds to sort of support, your product development. And it's important to also remember that factories are also taking a risk on you. They're producing a product and you're paying them 30% for a custom branded, maybe customized product that they didn't plan to sell anywhere else. That's still a big risk.
You got to put yourself in their shoes. And imagine that you're the sales manager of that factory in China, and some random dude from the US or the UK has just sent you an email. Oh, I don't know this guy. So you've got to think about it from their point of view and remember that this has to work for everybody.
It has to be mutually beneficial.
Yeah,
for sure. And I hate to do this right now, but I forgot to mention this at the top of the hour. We do have a hard stop because Francois is going live with Ryan, Jonathan, and Paul for Ecom expansion at 4. You're looking at me confused. Am I doing this at the wrong time? Okay, I'm just saying we got about 5 minutes left. We want to give Ben time to plug his business and stuff. So,
well, before that, I do want to learn a little bit more, and I know we have that hard stop, but I do want to learn a little bit more about how this works with the brokerage and with exits, and sort of what tips and tricks would you suggest when this is such an important topic nowadays? Exits. Everyone's talking about it. Thrasio raised over $1 billion in funds, and we're seeing all these other aggregators sort of get behind it too. What are some suggestions that you have to a seller that's considering an exit, and at what stage? And it's a very personal question, but at what stage would you recommend they even start to consider an exit?
I would suggest you can start to consider an exit before you even think you want to consider an exit. The worst thing you could do is wake up and say, I want to sell my business. What you want to do is wake up and say, now I'm going to plan about how I might sell my business. And there'll be people listening that say, Ben, I never want to sell my business. That's fine. But you need to consider that one day your mindset could change. And when that happens, you're going to be in a pickle if you haven't ever thought about it before. So the first thing to think about is don't max out growth and then decide to sell. You need to leave something on the plate for the buyer. There needs to be some meat on the bone. They want to accelerate the growth of your business even further and then eventually exit themselves. And you can strengthen your position for when you exit by reverse engineering it. So you need to find out what your business is worth now so that you have a reference point. Otherwise, you're trekking through the jungle without a map. Find out what it's worth now. Say it's $500,000. Could be 50 grand, could be 10 million, whatever. Doesn't matter. Find out what it's worth now. And then say to yourself, well, what would I sell it for? What would I be comfortable selling it for? And then reverse engineer from that. Then we put together the steps that you need to take to get there. We stack them up like dominoes and start knocking them down. That's where I would start. And the best place to do that is to get it valued by somebody competent who's got experience on all sides of the equation. That's owning and operating e-commerce businesses, experience in mergers and acquisitions, and experience in e-commerce accountancy. And if I may shamelessly plug my brokerage, which I'm going to do, That's Ecom Brokers, which is over at ecombrokers.co.uk.
We absolutely love to let people plug their business, and we'll even put
100%.
the website here on the screen for anybody watching.
There you go.
A lot of people don't know what they don't know, and a lot of people
Mhm.
don't know of these solutions out there, and they say, well, "Where the hell can I learn about that?" Hopefully, they learn about it here at Link Up Leaders and hear about everything that you went through today. So yeah, no, I mean, shamelessly plug it, please.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I went through the process of selling, and I went through a broker, and I'm grateful that I did. They introduced me to my buyer. You got to remember the landscape was very different then. Nobody had heard of any of these aggregators in this space, but they didn't do a great deal in terms of getting the business ready to sell or positioning it to sell. They valued, they pulled some reports from Amazon Seller Central and Shopify, and that was about it. Most of that work was done by me and my accountant, Allison, who is now my co-founder in Ecom Brokers. So she's got 20 plus years experience in mergers and acquisitions, and she's a specialist e-commerce accountant. And we felt like we could bring something different to the space. Me with the lived experience of, putting my blood, sweat, and tears into an e-commerce business, building it and selling it. And I'm doing it again with new brands now. So I still am up to date on everything that's going on in the industry now. Allison manages accounts for dozens of e-commerce businesses, and she's sold dozens of businesses in the past. So putting those two things together, we're able to help get e-commerce businesses properly set up and then positioned to sell to get the best possible price. But what we don't do is we don't list them on our website and slap them up there like the eBay of businesses. We work with a handful of sellers, and then we take those businesses and present them to a handful of buyers. So enough buyers to have, a competitive environment to get the best possible price, but only the right buyer who's right for that business. There are aggregators out there who might specialize in, or buyers out there in pet products. I wouldn't dream of taking somebody's sport brand and trying to sell it to them. So, we can work with people. Somebody might come to us and say, Ben, I want to sell my business now. And I'll say, well, hold your horses. Let's get it valued. Let's see where we are. And if it's what you want for it, or if it's at the level that you are comfortable with, we'll then work with you to position it over the next several months to get it sold. And that, so we can do it pretty quick, a couple months. On the other hand, it could be somebody says, I know I don't want to sell now, but tell me what it's worth. And then let's work towards my target. And then that might be much sooner than they anticipated. They might say, I want to sell it in 2 years for X. And we'll say, well, actually, we can get you there in 9 months or a year when we do this, 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 and this. And so we'll work together quite closely, almost on like a mentored route to an exit. Or it's just, more of the traditional brokered model. So, that's what we do. We're in the UK, which is an interesting spot to be in right now because there's so much in e-commerce going on transatlantic. We're positioned nicely for Europe and for the US and Canada. And we're operating globally and over ecombrokers.co.uk.
Awesome. And folks can check you out there. Again, it is on the screen for anybody watching, and we'll put it in the description of the audio experience as well. And then if folks have any questions for you about the information that you shared today, or they just want to learn more about your journey, how can they get in contact with you?
Sure. You can email me. That's ben@ecombrokers.co.uk. I'm on most of the social media channels. My handle is @BenLeonardPro on Facebook and Instagram, for example. And I am on LinkedIn, and I love to get messages on LinkedIn. So please do drop me a line. I love talking about this stuff. And I just like to chat. So get in touch.
And you've been on a couple other podcasts as well, like with Ryan Kramer on Crossover Commerce. Did you also do Norm's Lunch with Norm?
I've done Lunch with Norm. I'll be on there again reasonably soon, I think, doing his Legion with Tim as well. So yeah. Norm's a fun guy. I love Norm.
Awesome. We
He's
do too.
amazing.
The beard guy. Well, everybody be on the lookout for Ben's appearances on those shows as well. And if you liked what you saw or listened to here today, please be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, ring bells for notifications, share with your network so that more e-commerce business owners can learn from leaders like Ben. Ben, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ben.
We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.